Hey guys, Lucas Garvey here. I just wanted to take today to sort of make a beginner's course in a way on foreign cinema because it's always seemed to me to have a very high barrier to entry, and whether that's because the material tends to be older, or because it's black and white, or the subtitles, which I don't think it's that. I think it's really more so just the amount of foreign cinema there is. There's 100 years of history in this medium, so it can be very chaotic and hectic. It's like, oh man, there's tens of thousands of brilliant pictures. Where do I start? So I just want to make this video today to kind of talk about what I think are fantastic places to start if you have any interest in foreign cinema, whether it's you've watched all the great American pictures and start while watching that which is across the seas. Alright, I think there's 5 really good places to start with foreign cinema: French, Italian, Russian, German, and Asian. I know I'm being kind of broad for Asian, but mainly it's Japanese with a sprinkle of Chinese cinema in there too. Let's start off with Italian cinema, which I love to death, and really so many of the iconic American directors were heavily inspired by Italian cinema, especially the Italian Neorealism of the 1940s, which is really a product of World War II. So a lot of the pictures, and World War I to an extent, so a lot of the pictures in that era are heavily depressing and different, because at the same time, you have some of those American pictures, like the 30s, it's all talkies and just kind of flat Broadway kind of a show. But with the Italian Neorealism, there was sort of a deeper level to what was going on. A lot of people credit Roberto Rossellini's movie as the beginning of Italian Neorealism, particularly Rome Open City. But it's a whole trilogy. You got Rome Open City, Paisan, and German Ground Zero. Oh, US Zero, my bad. In my opinion, I think of these 3, Rome Open City is the best. It really started the Italian Neorealism movement. It changed, a lot with cinema, I think. But Paisan is heavily respected in film communities as the picture. I think it's in Scorsese's top 10 best movies of all time. So, and that's the thing too. There's a lot of Italian American directors. So if you like Scorsese or Coppola, you'll love any Italian movie. And I think it's a great place to start because this is kind of what started it all. So Paisan and Germany Year Zero is good, but it doesn't really reach the same heights as Paisan or Rome Open City. So that's a great place to start if you're interested in Italian cinema. But this next thing we're going to talk about is my favorite. A couple years later, I feel like it was perfected by Vittorio De Sica. He did the film Bicycle Thieves, which a lot of film schools talk about. It's if you take any film study class, you'll probably hear about Bicycle Thieves, and it's a great picture. But I think he perfected the whole movement, and this is the ending of an era really with Umberto D, and this sort of ended that kind of style of movie. It didn't make a whole lot of money, and it doesn't get nearly as much love as a lot of the other Italian neorealism movies, but I think it's the best one. 1952, so by then they were just done with it. They were done with the drab, they were done with the sort of depressing kind of undertones. I think at that point Italy was wanting something a bit more, not necessarily uplifting, but just different really, which we'll get to the sort of the next style of Italian cinema. But honestly, if you're gonna watch one Italian movie, I would make an Umberto D. The next director to sort of make his mark on Italian cinema was Federico Fellini, and these 2 movies are probably his best. I would say you got like Dolce Vita and 8½, which I think 8½is the better one. In my opinion, I think 8½ is just absolutely fantastic. Actually, fun fact, Federico Fellini was going to make his last movie with Martin Scorsese. Scorsese was huge at the time. I think this was at the 80s and 90s, around there. So, Scorsese was at like the height of his powers, and he was going to get a movie producer Fellini. Because it's crazy, a lot of these directors, in the last couple years of their life, they just have zero respect within the industry, and they struggle to get any movies made. So Fellini, a god king really, making 8.5 from La Dolce Vita, just heralded movies. He couldn't get a movie made to save his life. So Scorsese stepped in and was really trying to push to get this movie made. But unfortunately, he passed away before they could start shooting. If only they could have done that, you know, it probably would have been pretty hot. But fortunately, he made these ones. And 8.5 is just perfect. Fun fact about 8.5, heavily inspired by Fellini's personal experiences trying to make his 9th movie, which never ended up being made. So he made this instead, and that's why it's called 8.5. It's not his 9th movie, but it's, you know, the 8.5 movie. That's kind of the meme with that one, which I love it. It's a movie about making movies, which I'm not a huge fan of those. There's very few times that doesn't come off as, you know, self-serving. All right, next, let's go over some of the French cinema, mainly the French New Wave of the 1960s, which heavily inspired American cinema in the 70s. So if you like 70s movies like The Godfather or Chinatown or anything like that, check out the French New Wave. So the film that allegedly started the French New Wave is Breathless. And this movie, I love this movie, and it's very friendly. This inspired so much of modern day cinema that I think anyone could watch this today and enjoy it and not feel, you know, dazed and confused by it. This is one of the most influential movies of all time. Started the French New Wave, inspired the 70s, which, you know, the 70s is my favorite decade of cinema by far. And it's just a great movie. So if you watch one movie from the French, it'd be Breathless. But another really good movie that I don't think gets nearly as much love as I think it deserves is Hiroshima Mon Amour by Alain Resnais. And this movie is just so... The weirdest thing about this movie, and this actually came out before Breathless, so you could say that this started the French New Wave, and you could make that argument, but I'm not gonna say that. I don't know if it was as cemented. With Breathless, it was cemented, done deal. With this, it was like the beginning. It was like the beta almost of the French New Wave when you think about it. And the weirdest thing to me, this is a scene in this movie, and the whole thing's black and white, but every time I think about the scene, I remember it in color. It's one of those movies that I couldn't even recall what necessarily happens beat by beat, but there's such like a illuminating presence to the picture that sort of stays and echoes within me. I've only seen it like once or twice, I think, but it's a great picture. I love it to death. Hiroshima Mon Amour. Unfortunately, I'm not as educated in French cinema as some of these other ones, so that's all really I could recommend for the French movies. I've seen a couple other ones, but those are the two that I think are really fantastic. All right, for this next part, we're going to talk about Asian cinema, mainly Japanese. And the thing about this one is I feel like in America, at least, Japanese media is so ingrained in the culture here. Like, you know whether or not you're into sort of the Japanese style. You know what I mean? Whether it's you like, you know, the anime or just the aesthetic. There's so much Japanese product in America that you can easily tell whether or not you're interested. So I'm not gonna go as in depth to the importance of these movies and more just ones that I would recommend. A lot of people refer to this guy as the master, and he's pretty good, but it's Kurosawa. If you have any interest in Star Wars, George Lucas loves him to death. Scorsese loves him to death. So Kurosawa is just, you know, one of those rare genius types, honestly. George Lucas was heavily inspired by the film Hidden Fortress by Kurosawa to make Star Wars. So if you like that kind of picture, which really, and then Star Wars went on to influence all of modern cinema. So I think Kurosawa, if you're into kind of like the modern Hollywood movies, I think Kurosawa is a very digestible kind of director. The two movies that I would recommend you watch is Seven Samurai. His most famous picture, you know, it's about seven samurai. Pretty self-explanatory. It's a real epic. It's probably one of the best sort of old school epics, I would say. It's a great one. Highly recommend Seven Samurai. But then my favorite, personally, and you can kind of tell with a lot of these, I mention the populist opinion. Like, all right, everyone really likes Seven Samurai, but then I also go on and give my own opinion. Personally, the best Kurosawa film, in my opinion, is Dreams. It's just so good, and it's a new one, 1990. It's in color, which I think it's actually the first film I mentioned in color. So if you just cannot stand black and white, Dreams. There you go. You're welcome. Also has a little cheeky cameo with Martin Scorsese, which is always a blast. You know, the Scorster, and he plays Van Gogh in the movie, which is pretty funny. If you're in Japanese cinema, Kurosawa is a great place to start. If you've seen Kurosawa and maybe want something a bit more, These next two, I think, are really good couples with each other. They supplement each other in a kind of a strange way. You got Tokyo Story by Ozu and then House by Obashi. And these are very different movies, and I think they really represent the sort of polar opposites of Japanese cinema. Tokyo Story kind of takes you into sort of a transcendental dream. You know, it takes your time. There's these long shots. People stare into the camera. It's a very sort of methodical film. But in the way that this takes you to sort of a dream world, House does so in the same way, but in a very sort of heightened, surreal kind of a way. And it's weird how these both have sort of dreamlike qualities, but in completely different ways. They have completely different avenues in which they take you to that dream world. House and Tokyo Story, two fantastic Japanese pictures. I love them to death. All right, time for a bit of a Chinese sprinkle. You got Wong Kar-wai. And these are who I think are his two best pictures. Fallen Angels and In the Mood for Love. Particularly In the Mood for Love. I don't know, Wong Kar-wai, he's really honestly a household name when it comes to foreign cinema. It's one of the most beautiful movies, I think. You can look at a still from this movie and just look at it for hours, because it's honestly just so enrapturing the way they shoot it. Same thing with Fallen Angels. Fallen Angels is probably like the extreme version of In the Mood for Love. They really just push everything to 100 and just max out everything, and it's a real ride. For Chinese cinema, that's the way to go. In Asian cinema, I think honestly, of all these, I think Asian cinema is by far the most digestible for an American audience. So if you're kind of daunted or don't really know where to start, I think Asian cinema is just a nice softball. And I'm sure most of you have seen, Japanese shows and movies, regardless of what it is, like Akira or anything like that. If you haven't seen Akira, that's number one on the list, baby. You gotta watch Akira. It's too good. Next up, we're gonna talk about Russia. And Russia is interesting because of all of these countries, they have remained the most prominent throughout the history of film. A lot of these countries, they have their moments in the spotlight. They sort of peak and fall. Like in Italy, the 40s were great. In France, the 60s were great. But Russia has really just been a strong superpower in the story of film through its whole lifespan, really. And a great place to start with Russian cinema is the beginning with the film Battleship Potemkin. This is frequently talked about in film schools. It's really heralded with its editing techniques. The Russians were actually way ahead of the curve. Like when sort of cinema hit the scene, they saw that editing was the film. Because I think a lot of these other, countries, they saw the acting above the editing. They saw the camera shots. They put all the other aspects of the film above the editing. But when you think about it, the edit is what's the true part of the film. It's the unique, only part of the film that can't be shown anywhere else, And the Russians really got that from day one, especially with this film, Battleship Potemkin. The editing in this movie is actually insane. Considering that it came out in 1920, it's honestly kind of mind-boggling. It was 1925, excuse me. It's kind of mind-boggling just how ahead of the curve they were. Especially with the whole baby and the carol scene, which has been duplicated a trillion times. Which, I'm sure, if you've ever seen a movie with a stroller go down a set of stairs, they're referencing this movie. So I'd highly recommend it. And it's honestly, I think it's extremely watchable. It's probably one of the most watchable films in the 20s when it comes to foreign cinema, I'd say. Next up, for Russian cinema, we got a bit of a genius, and that's Andrei Tarkovsky. And I have a couple movies here, and I'll leave those in a bit. Honestly, Tarkovsky is kind of just, I don't even know what to say about his pictures. They really just make me speechless. And he's made some of the best films of all time, I would say. And if you're only gonna watch one piece of Russian cinema, or one director, I should say, I would do Tarkovsky. I think the director that Andrei Tarkovsky is the most similar to in America would probably be Kubrick, which is so weird to me because their styles are completely different. Because Kubrick is kind of I almost want to say sort of a scientific and cold approach to film, especially his earlier movies. I think later, with Barry Lyndon and Eyes Wide Shut, he sort of gained a warmer touch to a lot of his films. But early on, it was very cold. And Tarkovsky is such a warm-hearted director. Every shot just seems like kind of like a childhood memory in a lot of ways. But I think where they're similar is their approach to cinema. It's that sort of perfectionist idea, and you can just tell that every shot, it just feels like they slaved over it for hours, just waiting, just trying to get the perfect shot and doing 100 takes and all that stuff. You can really just get that sense of perfectionism within a lot of his movies. A great starting point for Tarkovsky is Solaris. If you like 2001, this is a great place to start. It's kind of a similar vibe. In fact, I think Tarkovsky made this picture as a response to 2001, because he was saying that he felt that 2001 was such a cold and sort of disheartening movie, and he wanted to make something a bit warmer. But personally, my favorite Tarkovsky film has to be The Mirror. It's so fantastic, which it's kind of upsetting because there's no Blu-ray of it. There's only the DVD, and this DVD transfer is terrible. Which also just speaks to the movie itself, because if I can sit through this terrible DVD transfer and still say it's one of the best movies of all time, that just proves how great it is. But The Mirror is probably his best movie by far, and honestly one of the best movies ever made, I would say. And then Andrei Rublev is an epic. So if you're into epic period pieces, this is a fantastic film. One last Russian picture I want to mention is Soy Kuba. This version is presented by Scorsese and Coppola. So if they like it, you'll like it. Like, let's be real. This is by Mikhail Kolotovs. Yeah, this film just has such a high, like a tense energy to it. So much of it is handheld. Most of the film is shot on like an 8mm lens. Like, it's super wide shots. And considering it came out in the 60s, which it didn't come out in the 60s, it was shot, edited, and made in the 60s, but it didn't really get a full release until like the 90s. But yeah, this film is such like a interesting little nook in sort of the wide history of film. All right, next up we got the Germans. And really, the Germans are a bit more limited, I would say. They only have one or two directors that I would say are fantastic. But they're really fantastic and worth watching. And also digestible, which is the main part of this video, talking about films that the average person can watch and enjoy. I'm gonna start off with, this is kind of an oldie, which I like though. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's a part of German Impressionism from the 1920s. And if you're really into surreal movies, highly, highly, highly recommend The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's a great picture. And just the sets are so intertwining. It's very gothic also. Also, if I don't have it with me right now, Nosferatu is another fantastic German Impressionist film from the 20s. Those are two great old school horror films you should check out if you're into surreal horror and anything like that. It's time for the big kahuna. Herzog. Herzog has really, it seems like he's gotten a lot of traction over the last couple of years too. But it's really just, his films are amazing, honestly. It's like there's just so many good films. Out of all the Herzog movies, Aegir, The Wrath of God is definitely the way to go. I think it's an absolutely fantastic picture. I don't know, it really goes in depth into madness, you know, which might be sort of a romantic way of putting it, but that's just honestly how I feel when I watch the movie. It's a real in-depth trek into insanity, which if you like Apocalypse Now, you need to watch Aegir, The Wrath of God. It's very similar. They match up. It's a fantastic picture. So Aegir, The Wrath of God is probably where I would start with Herzog. And if you like it, just blast through the rest of his movies. Watch Nosferatu. Watch Fitzcarraldo. You know, watch, you know, The Enigma of Kasperhausen. You know, they're all equally fantastic movies. So really, for German cinema, Herzog's the guy. So those are the main 5 countries that I think you should explore and sort of look over if you get into cinema. But there's still a few nooks and crannies that I would highly recommend checking out. And sort of diamonds in the rough, so to speak, in other countries. One of the best directors of all time, I would say, is Ingmar Bergman. And this is his film, The Seventh Seal. This is a Swedish picture. And this is heavily taught in film schools. And that's one of the things, if it's taught in film schools, it's probably a pretty digestible movie. Because from what I can tell, the film schools don't really go too in depth with like the crazy, you know, wacky movies. Like, I don't think too many film schools are going to be showing something like House. You know what I mean? But Seventh Seal, you know, they'll mention a lot. Like, if you take a film study class, this will be like one of the first 10 movies you'll learn about. So Seventh Seal is by far his most well-known movie and most beloved movie. But in my opinion, I think his film persona is his best. It's just such like it just marries so many things that I like together. It has some surreal elements, but it's also kind of melodramatic, and there's a lot of sort of dual imagery. And it's about, you know, the persona, you know, kind of your own personal perspective of who you are and those kind of things. And honestly, I think it's probably his best movie by far. This next guy I want to talk about actually made a lot of films in America. So if you've seen his American films and you like them, then it's a great sort of jumping point to get into his foreign films. That being Roman Polanski. His two most well-known American movies, Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown, both amazingly fantastic in their own right. I love them to death. But if you've seen these, and you like them, obviously, I would highly recommend checking out his foreign films. In particular, Repulsion and Knife in the Water. And he's a Polish director, which Knife in the Water was his first movie. And it's psychological thriller, very American, very digestible, good to go. In fact, these are both psychological thrillers. In fact, I think all of his movies are psychological thrillers when you think about it. Oh, this is his second movie, actually. So if you want to sort of, it's a good starting point. 1, 2, bada bing, bada boom. But no, these are two great movies. If you like Chinatown, if you like Rosemary's Baby, check these two out. Personally, I really like both. I can't choose which one I like more. They're both fantastic. Just get both. They're both very weird. So those are all the big movies that I wanted to recommend that I think are very good starting points of foreign cinema. Kind of think of it as a foreign film study 101, but way better than 101. This is like some, you know, 305, whatever, you know, top of the top best foreign films you can watch. So now I kind of want to just make some sort of, I just want to measure some resources. So if you start watching, so let's say you watch Italian cinema and you're like, well, this is so cool, I want to find more Italian films. Here's some resources that I use a lot to find more foreign films. You might have noticed that a lot of these, you know, DVDs looked very similar. That's because they were all published and made by the same company, the Criterion Collection, which is a great resource, and here's one of them right now. They're an absolutely fantastic resource for finding these old movies. A, they publish them, which is fantastic. B, they have all these articles on their website talking about different, you know, film genres and film eras and different moments in history and all this stuff. They have a lot of interviews with these foreign film directors. They even interview a lot of American directors and actors and ask them about their favorite film. And they'll just mention like 5 or 10 movies. And oh, that sounds cool. Check it out and you'll be good to go. So Criterion is a great resource to find new movies. Another thing I want to talk about, which is a really good resource that I feel like I never hear other people mention, is the book, The Story of Film. And I love this book to death. There's also a 10-episode BBC series by the author. And I think it pretty much covers the exact same material. But I watched that series first and then I got the book. And it's just great, honestly. Like whenever I'm sort of wanting to find a new movie, I'll just open it up. I'll see a still frame and say, ooh, the saga of Ghost of Berlings, and it'll mention like its importance and what it's about. And it's almost just like an encyclopedia, really. And it has several chapters about all these like genres and how they interconnect. It's like, oh, well, in the Middle East, there was this movie that affected India, and then India made, you know, Mother India, and then that affected this, and then bada bing, bada boom, bada bing. And it's just very, it honestly is just a fantastic resource. And it's honestly, I would just highly recommend picking up this book. It's a great read. It mentions just about everything you'd want to know, and it goes really in depth and talks about how these sort of films connect with each other. So if you want to see like what genres or what film eras inspired the 70s, or I guess rather what the 70s were inspired by, this will tell you. If you want to know what the 80s were inspired by, this will tell you. If you want to know this, that, the other thing, where it started, where it ended, it just goes super in depth on the story of film. So that's sort of my introduction to foreign cinema. If there's anything that you feel is must-watch material that I didn't mention, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for more interesting movies and, you know, things like that. So feel free to comment, let me know. If you have any questions about any of these movies, you know, where to watch. Also, I'd recommend watching all these subtitled. I know reading can be a chore, but personally, I just like subtitles. Which I'm sure you can watch the dub and be fine, but I'm just a subtitle kind of a guy. If you have any questions about any of these films, or you'd like me to go more in depth about any certain genre or film era or anything like that, let me know in the comments. I hope this video was informative and educational and helped sort of break that barrier into getting to foreign cinema and help some of you find either new interesting foreign films that you haven't heard about before, or kind of push you over the edge to start watching foreign cinema. Also, one last thing, if you don't want to buy the Blu-rays and DVDs, because you know they can be kind of expensive sometimes, I would highly recommend the service Filmstruck. It's like Netflix, but they really focus on old films and foreign films in addition. So I'd highly recommend Filmstruck. I think it's made by the same people who do Criterion, so I would just highly recommend that. If you don't want to buy the Blu-rays and DVDs, that's a great place to find all these films I talked about. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.